Hey guys, I tried to record this yesterday and for some reason I tried like 4 times and it wouldn't record. So I'm going to try again today. Hopefully we can get this done so that I can post this. So on the main screen is just, this was a nature versus nurture, and you were just sorting the topics that was from last week into which category it went into. If you'd like to pause this and just kind of put those in categories yourself, that's totally okay. This week we are looking at Unit 4. Here are your Unit 4 assignments. Remember, the test is on Thursday, and then we will start Unit 5. So try to keep up. If you're behind, you can always do those assignments, but just do your best to try to keep up with the pace. I know it's really fast, but unfortunately, it's a lot of content to cover and not a lot of time to do it in. So we're in Unit 4 or Chapter 4, the biological mind, the physical basis of behavior. We're looking at the actual structures in the brain and kind of what they do. So 4-1 is what is biological psychology. Part A on that is looking at early attempts to understand it. Basically, early ways of doing this was mainly through psychology. I'm sorry, not psychology, through autopsy. And then they really lacked just kind of a general understanding of physical biology of the mind, basically what it really looked at. They just did not have a way to analyze that, unfortunately. So that was early attempts. Then we have, in Section B, we have Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He was an anatomist, and he was the first person to look at the brain on a microscopic level, at the full nervous system, not just the brain. And then we have John Hewlings Jackson. He was a neurologist. He came to the conclusion showing the larger structures of the brain. And these two guys both received the Nobel Peace Prize in Medicine for their work in, looking at the anatomy of the brain. I think it was in 1917 was when they got that. You could probably look it up, but just so that you're aware, this picture over here on the left is of a functional MRI. Basically, what they do is they'll have you answering questions or looking at things while you're having your MRI, and they will see the parts of the brain that are activated while you do that. Okay. There were new inventions like the PET scan and the functional MRI. Those are all things that they use to get a deeper look into the brain and be able to see kind of the structures and what's going on. All right, Section 4-2 is looking at how the nervous system is organized. As you know, the nervous system consists of the brain and the spine and spinal cord. Those are the main parts of the nervous system. Obviously, you've got some smaller sections, but that's kind of the general overview. All right, so 4-3 is looking at the structures individually and their functions as part of the central nervous system. There are a lot of these, so if you need to pause and take notes, feel free to do that because this is pretty dense material and it's a lot to cover. All right, so the first section is spinal cord. That's actually about 2% of the way to the central nervous system, but it is a central function to be able to send and receive messages. Now, interestingly enough, the spine is made up of the vertebrae, which kind of go in a circular form, and you can't see it, but in the middle of the spine is where the spinal cord goes. And the spine is basically there to protect the spinal cord because, as you know, if any damage happens to the spinal cord, that can cause paralysis, and your body does not regenerate those nerve muscles. So if they die or something happens, they get severed, there's no way to fix that. And depending on where the damage occurs is going to be where the paralysis starts. So if the damage is low in the spine down here, that's going to be from like waist down. If this damage is kind of mid-chest, that would obviously be mid-chest down. And then if it's any higher than that, you're going to be a paraplegic. I mean, you're going to be paralyzed from the neck down. And that's one of those things that they've been working on for years and years to try to figure out a way to fix. But unfortunately, that's not something that has happened to date. All right, so it serves as a major conduit for information to go to and from the brain. It's kind of like the telephone. It sends information to and from. There are 31 total pairs of spinal nerves, and your reflexes are initiated by the spinal cord without the brain's assistance. It's just an automatic response. It's not something that you actually have to physically do. Then we have the brainstem. The brainstem is kind of what connects the spine to the brain. On the right of the brainstem, you have the medulla. On the left, you have the pons. And in the middle, you kind of have what's called the midbrain. Okay, and that's all at the bottom of the brain. It manages things like heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, all of those things that you do not think about doing. That's what it manages. If you have damage to the brain stem or you have like a tumor or something there, it's almost always fatal, because that's what regulates your body. That's what regulates your breathing. That's what regulates your heart. And those are big areas. Without that, I mean, you just can't function. The cerebellum is the next area. It's essential in balance and motor coordination. When you drink alcohol, this is the first structure that's affected. It impairs balance and motor coordination. The cerebellum contains more nerve cells than the rest of the brain combined. You also have the midbrain and the reticular formation, which is the midline structure. And we'll talk about those in a little while. So the next section is the subcortical structures. That includes the thalamus, which is the process. It processes sensory information, states of arousal, learning, and memory. It's also the gateway to the cortex, the sensory system, vision, hearing, touch. And then it goes on to the cerebral cortex. So it's kind of like a midway point. It also is involved in memory and state of consciousness. Lesions here can cause problems associated with profound memory loss. So make sure that you're aware of that. Lesions are kind of like cuts or sores, something like that, blood clots. Anything that's going to cause a problem here is going to cause profound memory loss. During REM sleep, it also kind of tunes out the outside world for you, making it difficult for you to wake up. Disturbances in the circuits are usually accompanied with seizures. Okay, seizures are when you have the misfiring of your neurons across the midbrain from one hemisphere to the other. When they misfire, that's what a seizure is. So make sure that you are aware of that. So the basal ganglia is the next area. It's a subcortical structure as well that participates in the control of movement. Degeneration here is Parkinson's disease is a degeneration of this area where you have involuntary movements, and it's extremely difficult to control those. Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's, and I mean, it's just extremely painful, extremely difficult to deal with. That's a very degenerative disease. It doesn't ever get better. It only gets worse. Okay. This area contributes to several psychological disorders, including OCD and ADHD. Then we have the hypothalamus. That's what's called the 4F structure. It participates in the regulation of thirst, temperature, hunger, sexual behavior, and aggression. And the 4 F's are feeding, fleeing, fighting, and fornication. So basically, it's your fight or flight. That's kind of what you want to think about. The motivation and homeostatic tasks by directing the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system with hormones. So it kind of directs everybody, just so that you're aware. Again, there's a picture here. It's really small. There's a bigger one in your textbook, just kind of showing you where everything's at. The hippocampus is the next area. It participates in memory. The name literally means seahorse in Greek because of the shape. It's essential in forming long-term memories, but the memories are not stored there. They're just sorted. Damage to this area can cause profound impairments in the ability to form new memories. Intelligence, personality, all that stuff is not going to be damaged. They're going to stay the same. But basically, you would have everything up to the point of where the damage occurred would stay the same, but you're not going to be able to transition new memories to long-term memories. So it's basically like starting every day over. Okay. It just kind of wipes the slate clean at that point every day. The cingulate cortex is above the corpus callosum. It's divided into 3 sections. The anterior or the forward section participates in decision making and emotions, and the posterior section participates in memory and visual processing. Both of them participate with the hypothalamus in controlling the autonomic nervous system. Okay, the amygdala is the next area, and it's located in the temporal lobe, and it's believed to be participating in emotional processing. Its name literally means Greek for almond. It's deeply embedded in the temporal cortex and kind of curves around both hemispheres. It receives sensory information and in the brain, and then it responds to both positive and negative stimuli. So basically, it's the emotion that you feel once you look at something. Okay. Then we have the nucleus accumbens. It's a structure that participates in reward and pleasure. It relates to a person's sense of social inclusion. So when people have strong connections with friends and family, the nucleus accumbens is active, and when there are less strong feelings, it's not as strong. All right, so next we have the cerebral cortex. There are several sections to this. The corpus callosum is a wide band of nerves that connect the right and left hemisphere. We have the cerebral cortex, which is a thin layer of neurons that covers the outer surface of the hemispheres. And then we have cortex means bark, or in Latin, and it's talking about it looking like bark on a tree, so it's talking about the way it looks. The average 20-year-old has, the rest of the brain, is white matter, or fiber pathways. The average 20-year-old has about 100,000 miles of white matter. If stretched out flat, the cerebral cortex would be about 2.5 square feet. To fit in the skull, basically, it is convoluted or wrinkled. The more wrinkles, the higher your intellectual capacity. So in this instance, being wrinkly is a good thing. So just so that you know, the cerebral cortex, the frontal lobe, is primarily with your motor cortex. It deals with sophisticated cognitive functions. It's adjacent to Broca's area, which produces speech. Damage to Broca's area produces difficulty in speaking, but they can still comprehend speech. So they can't speak, but they can still understand it. The prefrontal cortex is the most forward part of the frontal lobe. It deals with planning of behavior, attention, and judgment. Abnormalities account for characteristics of psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia and ADHD. The frontal cortex is also the part of the brain that deals with like judgment. It's the very front of the brain, and it doesn't really mature until you're in your 20s. So when we talk about teenagers making immature decisions, it's because your frontal lobe is not mature yet. And you just don't have that impulse control that you need in order to make decisions like, not drinking and driving and not taking drugs and, not racing your car and things like that, that are traditionally, teenage type things. It's because that frontal lobe is not mature yet. Then we have the orbital frontal cortex, which is behind the protrusions of the eye. So that's what's right behind your eyes. Damage here can dramatically deficits in social behavior and experience of emotions, but you still retain your intelligence, language skills, ability to pay attention, and ability to learn and remember. We also have the the occipital lobe. I can't talk today. This is located in the back of the brain, and it's home of the primary visual cortex. The primary visual cortex begins process of interpreting information from the eyes by responding to basic information like images, borders, shading, kind of taking in the whole picture. There are two pathways that connect the occipital lobe to the rest of the brain. You have the temporal lobe, which allows you to recognize objects, and then you have the parietal lobe, which allows you to process the movement of objects. Okay. In your temporal lobe, it's home of the primary auditory cortex. It allows you to process sound. The process is a higher visual system tasks, look like recognition of objects and faces of familiar people. Damage to Wernicke's area deals with fluent speech, and but the people don't really make any sense, and they can't comprehend speech because that's the processing part of it. But they're really blissful about it because they just have no idea that there's even a problem. So they're just speaking gibberish, but they don't know that they're speaking gibberish, so it doesn't really make any difference. All right, so here is Broca's area right here in this orange, and then Wernicke's area is right behind it. Okay, those two areas deal with speech deficits. Okay. The cerebral cortex also has the parietal lobe. That's where your sensory cortex is. It helps to localize touch, pain, skin temperature, body temperature. Damage here can produce symptoms of neglect syndrome. Just so that you know, there's also the separation of right and left brain. You have something called lateralization, and basically what that means is that your right brain controls the left side of your body, okay, your left side, and then your left brain controls the right side of your body. So when somebody has a stroke and they're paralyzed on their left side, that means that they had a stroke in their right brain, okay, in the right side of their head. So that's called lateralization. There's also, to treat life-threatening seizures, sometimes they do a procedure called a split brain procedure, where they literally cut down the center of the brain and separate those nerve fibers in order to stop them from misfiring. Now, this is not the same thing as a lobotomy where they actually take half of your brain out. This is a procedure to help stop seizures. So they would not do a lobotomy unless it was absolutely necessary. Okay. And they generally do that. I don't think they even do it anymore, but when they did it before, it was because of severe psychiatric disorders. All right. So just be aware of that, that those are two totally different things. If you have more questions, just let me know. All right, so 4-4 is the peripheral nervous system, or the PNP, and the endocrine system. I did not take a ton of notes on this stuff just because you guys, if you've ever taken anatomy or biology, you know a lot of this stuff, so there's no reason to write down specifics. The somatic nervous system is the peripheral nervous system that brings sensory information to and from the CNS, or the central nervous system, and it transmits commands to the muscles. So basically, it's the telephone of the body. It sends and receives information in order to control things. All right, and you've got a picture here to kind of show you where they go and which ones do that. Then we have the autonomic nervous system. It's a division of the peripheral nervous system that directs the activity of the glands, organs, and smooth muscles. The sympathetic nervous system coordinates arousal, while the parasympathetic system is associated with rest, repair, energy storage. And then we have the enteric nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, and it consists of nerve cells that are embedded in the lining of the stomach, well, the gastrointestinal system. All right, so next is the endocrine system. This is the system responsible for releasing hormones into the bloodstream. Excuse me, that's going to be your glands, your thyroid gland, your pituitary gland, your pineal gland, all of those that release the various hormones into your system. That's going to be covered with the endocrine system. And then how do neurons communicate? That's our last section. Basically, they talk through neurons and glia. That's the system responsible for the release of the hormones into the bloodstream. Here you have a nerve cell, a neuron, that you can see up here. You have the cell body, you have the nucleus, you have the axons, and then you have the axon terminals. On one end, in between the axons, you can see the ions here in the middle. This just kind of breaks it apart and lets you see what is actually going on here. And then on the right side, you have the synaptic gap, where you're looking at the distance between the synapses. Okay. Again, these pictures are in your book. This is just to kind of clarify. You also have the blood-brain barrier. There is a barrier in your brain so that everything doesn't transmit straight to it, like medications, diseases, things like that. Not everything gets into your brain, and that kind of separates it out. This is what that looks like. You also have an image for the glia for myelin. This shows you how the myelin is actually formed and kind of what it does. You have two different versions of it. You have the glia in the CNS, and then you have the glia in the PNS, so the peripheral and the central. All right, they're very similar, just so you know. So the last part of this is neural signaling, looking at the action potential, the electronic signal arising from the neuron, and then you have resting potential, which is the measure of the charge when the neuron's not processing information. It shows both of those, what that looks like. And then you have chemical signaling, which is when the two come together to share chemicals back and forth. That's through the very end of the axon, and you have the gap, the synaptic gap. And then you have another picture over here showing you what it looks like when those are blocked by inhibitors. All right, you have a working one over here where you can see what's going on, and then on the right, you have where it's being blocked. All right, and that's important to know. All right, and the last section is types of neurotransmitters. Scientists have discovered more than 50 chemicals that are neurotransmitters. Your book only covers a few of them, but it does go into depth about them. I went on and put this chart up here because it kind of covers everything, but there are more that are included. This is just some of them. On the left is an MRI, and you can see kind of the different areas of the brain that are active. Okay. And lastly, this is just a kind of a wrap up of the neural communication. This is what it looks like, different types of it. If you guys have any questions, I have office hours today at 1, this Thursday at 1. If you have questions, you can also email me at any time. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you later.